I used to think I knew my family. Turns out, I was just playing a part in my brother's script. Before I tell you how I took everything back and why I don't regret it, let me ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who smiled right to your face? If you have, then you already know how this story feels. And if you like stories about smart revenge, the kind where the underdog doesn't just fight back but wins, hit subscribe now and tap like. It helps more people find these stories. And trust me, this one is worth hearing to the end. It was raining that morning. Not a summer storm. A steady, old grief kind of rain. The kind that darkens sidewalks and makes the city move slower, like it knows what day it is. My Father's Day. Richard Carter, builder of 3 companies, keeper of 1,000,000 secrets, a man who could turn a handshake into a contract and a rival into a friend. For everyone but family. The church smelled like lilies and wet wool coats. People I barely recognized leaned in and told me what a great man he was. They used words like legend and mentor and self-made. I nodded. I said thank you. I felt nothing and everything at the same time. Daniel arrived last, my younger brother. The wheelchair rolled down the aisle, pushed by a cousin who always volunteered for the parts that made him look generous. Daniel rested his wrists on the armrests, fingers loose, head tilted, eyes perfectly glossy. He looked like a portrait of suffering. People touched his shoulder and whispered, "Stay strong." He blinked slowly, like those words meant something to him. Like he hadn't rehearsed the look in a mirror. After the service, we drove across town to the law office. Old mahogany, thicker carpet than necessary, walls lined with framed degrees and a horizon of leather spines. The kind of room built to make you accept whatever is said inside it. Mark Stevens waited for us with the measured calm of a man who lives in rooms like this. Mark is my boyfriend. You should know that. I met him on a compliance audit. He was sharp and steady, and he saw through me in a way that most men never do. He asked once if I was afraid of being understood. I told him no. I just don't see the point if understanding doesn't change anything. We sat. The rain kept up against the windows. The light made everything look like an old photograph. Mark opened the folder. He glanced at me first, then at Daniel. I watched his eyes. No tremor, no flicker. His voice was a clean line. "To my daughter Emily Carter, I leave 10% of my estate." It hit like a cold glass of water thrown in my face. 10. The number echoed. 10. To my son, Daniel Carter, 90%, in trust for his care, given his permanent disability and inability to work. The room thinned. The air, the sound, the distance between us, all thinner. My heartbeat sounded mechanical. Daniel swallowed, hard enough for everyone to see it, then let his mouth lift at the corners in a small, brave smile. He squeezed the armrests with the kind of pressure you use when you want your knuckles to show. The cousin behind him made a throat noise that was almost a sob. Aunt Linda said, "Your father was a fair man." She always uses the word fair like it's a blessing. She never learned it can also be a weapon. I said very little. I asked Mark to read the clause again. He did. I asked about the trustee. He said my father had appointed the firm. I asked for copies. He said of course. I turned to Daniel and told him Dad always wanted the best for him. The words came out smooth, polite, like a toast you don't believe in. We signed acknowledgments. We rose. People patted Daniel's shoulder again. The cousin wheeled him toward the elevator. The tires hummed on the carpet. Someone told me that grief looks good on me. I smiled for the first time all day. A small one, the kind that says, "You have no idea. Here's what you should know. My father and I weren't at war. We were simply never on the same side. He respected numbers, not feelings, outcomes, not intentions. He liked my mind," he said. He trusted my competence, he said. He also said Daniel needed him more. Love in our house was a balance sheet. Whoever required the most attention drew the most resources. I learned early to stop requiring anything. Daniel was born dramatic. He cried louder, smiled bigger, broke rules with the flair of a stage magician. In high school, he discovered theater and never came back from it. He had real talent, the kind that makes a room lean forward. But talent never felt enough for Daniel. He wanted an audience he could control even when the lights were off. He learned where sympathy lives and how to mine it. He knew my father's guilt about not being around. He knew how to make that guilt produce. He learned the right words, the right pauses, the right posture. The wheelchair arrived later. A minor accident, a diagnosis that required therapy, a miracle recovery that somehow stalled just short of complete. A good doctor moved away. A new specialist spoke, cautiously. Second opinions grew expensive. Daniel's pain flared at holidays and quieted when there was no one to watch. I saw patterns. My father saw his son. When you love the idea of yourself as a protector, you don't always check the locks. By evening, the sky had wrung itself out. The streets shone black. I didn't go home. I drove. No destination, just asphalt and wiper blades and the bitter taste of what people call fairness. I passed the community theater downtown, the old brick box with a gold-painted sign and a bench out front where teens with too much eyeliner smoke and talk about New York. The lobby lights were on, curtains drawn. A pulse of music thumped under the door. I parked. I told myself I just needed air. I told myself I wasn't going to do anything reckless. I walked down the alley, past the gray door actors use when they don't want to be seen. A window was cracked open near the loading bay. Voices spilled out. An actor's projection. A woman counting beats. A man laughing. Then a voice I knew. Daniel. Clear. Strong. Unbroken. I stood on a milk crate and looked. The stage was taped out for marks. A cheap throne sat center, 6 chairs off to the side, and my brother was on his feet. He crossed downstage on a diagonal, hips square, shoulders open, like a director had drilled it into him. He took the throne in one fluid move, not a wobble, not a wince. He delivered a line like a blade. The front row laughed on time. A woman in a black turtleneck clapped once, sharp, like a metronome. "Break again," she said. Back to 1. Daniel hopped off the platform. Hopped. He jogged back to his mark. He cracked his neck left and right. He shook out his hands. He looked happy, free, beautiful in the way a person is when they're exactly where they belong. And I should tell you, for a second, I almost smiled. The brother I remembered was right there, the one before the chair. Then the next thought arrived. Heavy. Precise. My father died believing in a lie because someone performed it well enough to pass as truth. Someone who knows how an audience thinks. Someone who figured out that courtrooms and living rooms respond to the same cues. Someone who just inherited 90% of everything because he knows how to hit his mark. I climbed down. I didn't cry. I didn't storm the door. I didn't film him through the glass like a stranger chasing clout. I did what wins wars. I went quiet. I went home. I opened a new notebook and wrote the first line. Inventory of leverage. I listed what I knew. Dates. Names. Doctors. Spasms that appeared on holidays. Late-night parties where he forgot to limp. Campus photos he untagged when our father started following him. A fundraiser where he stood to accept an award for courage and said he needed the podium to lean on. I wrote down the cousin's name who always pushed the chair. I wrote down the guilty look he never quite hides. I wrote down the firm my father used to update the trust. I wrote down the trustee. I wrote down the bank. Around midnight, Mark called. He asked if I'd eaten. I told him yes. He asked how I was. I told him fine. He didn't push. He knows better than to offer comfort I won't take. He said we would review copies in the morning. He said he was sorry. The words were clean, like a promise. Or a warning. I slept a few hours, woke up at 4, looked out at a city that had rinsed itself and decided to keep going. I made coffee. I opened the notebook again and wrote the second line. Timeline to removal. That's the moment it truly began. Not at the church, not in the lawyer's office, not even at the theater window where my brother stood on his own legs and took everything that should have been ours. It began here, in the quiet, when I chose the long road over the loud one, when I decided to win like numbers do, patiently, inevitably. You want to know how this ends, so did I. But first comes the part where the audience is still clapping, and the stage lights feel warm, and a man who thinks he's untouchable walks off smiling into a night that has already turned against him. Stay with me. The plan starts next. Revenge doesn't start with confrontation. It starts with paperwork. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen at the theater. Not Mark, not friends, not the few relatives who might have believed me, because belief isn't proof, and proof is the only language courts speak. The first step was to get inside Daniel's medical file. That sounds dramatic, but I work in compliance. Rules and systems are what I live in. I know where files sleep, and I know which locks people think are real. Hospitals keep records, like they keep promises. Not perfectly. There's always a weak seam. A temporary login never deactivated. A fax machine that spits to a shared tray. I found it on a Tuesday, 9 clicks in. His original diagnosis, sure. The accident, the therapy, and then the progress reports that stopped 3 years ago. The permanent disability line wasn't a conclusion from a doctor. It was a placeholder, never updated, simply carried forward from visit to visit. I could feel my jaw tighten. That meant the chair wasn't a medical sentence. It was a choice. A performance so good it had gone unquestioned for years. The second step was finding the right witness. Not the cousin, not some bitter ex. I needed someone with credibility, someone who didn't know me and had no reason to lie. I thought about the theater director, but that was risky. Actors are loyal to their own. I settled on a stagehand. They see everything. They're invisible and essential. Perfect. I went back to the theater the following Friday, not during a show, but during rehearsal changeover. I loitered by the alley door, holding a coffee cup like I belonged. The stagehand stepped out for a smoke. His name tag said Kyle. I said I was a fan of Daniel's work. That made him laugh, the kind of laugh that says you have no idea. He told me Daniel could walk circles around all of us, but liked saving it for the stage. I kept my face still. My pulse not so much. Step 3 was timing. Courts run on calendars, not adrenaline. I had to make sure my proof landed exactly when it would matter most. When the trustee reviewed the first disbursement from the estate, if I moved too soon, Daniel could bury it in appeals. Too late, and he'd already have shifted assets where I couldn't touch them. Mark and I had dinner that night. I didn't tell him yet, but I watched him, the way he read the wine list, the way he noticed when the waiter forgot my water. Precision. That's what I needed. I knew when the time came, I'd tell him everything. But first I had to make sure everything was unshakable. By the second week, I had the footage. The stagehand let me in through the side door one afternoon. I filmed Daniel warming up. Full stretches, squats, a leap onto the low platform. It was clean, steady, undeniable, and I didn't just keep the video. I backed it up in 3 places, one of them off-site, because if you're going to pull the pin on a grenade like this, you make sure it explodes no matter who tries to stop it. I also had a voice recording. A bar downtown, Daniel with a whiskey in hand, bragging to his friends. My dad always fell for the guilt thing. Emily never got it. You gotta look helpless, not be helpless. Laughter. Glasses clinking. Someone asked, "What if she finds out?" Daniel said, "She won't. She's too calculated." He dragged out the word like it was an insult. I saved that too. By the 3rd week, my notebook wasn't just a list. It was a blueprint. Medical proof. Eyewitness testimony. Video. Audio, timeline, delivery method, legal angle. I even had a PR contingency, just in case the story leaked before we hit court. I'd learned from my father, if you control the narrative, you control the outcome. And here's the truth I started to understand. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about the years he had taken up space in our family as a victim, while I'd been cast as the cold one. This was about the way he made my father pity him and doubt me. This was about reclaiming the version of me that my father never got to see, the one who could outplay them both. The night before I looped Mark in, I sat at my desk with the rain coming down hard again. Same kind of rain as the funeral. I thought about how Daniel must feel right now, untouchable, adored, flush with the future my father's will had just bought him. He had no idea that in a few weeks he'd walk into a courtroom and walk right out of his own story. When Mark came over the next day, I closed the notebook, slid it across the table, and said, "Read." He read. When he finished, he looked up at me. His eyes didn't hold pity. They held something sharper. He said, "We can make this stick." That's when the plan stopped being mine alone and started being ours. Courtrooms don't smell like justice. They smell like paper, coffee, and the nerves of everyone who knows their life is about to be rewritten. Daniel was already there when I walked in, perfect suit, hands folded neatly in his lap, the wheelchair in its polished glory gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He gave me the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, a quiet reminder that in his mind, this was already over. The judge called us to order. Mark rose first, his voice calm, measured. He walked the court through the will, the inheritance, the irreversible disability that had justified the distribution. No accusations yet, just facts. Because you don't fire the shot before the room is ready to hear it. Daniel's lawyer leaned back, almost bored. He knew the playbook. Make the sister look bitter, make the brother look tragic. And for a moment, I could see him thinking it would work. Then Mark said, "Your Honor, with permission, we'd like to enter new evidence." The first screen lit up with the medical report, the one I'd pulled from the hospital system. No notes of ongoing injury, no recommendations for continued treatment, just a frozen diagnosis, untouched for years. Daniel's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. The file stayed on the record. Next came the footage. The lights dimmed slightly as the projector came on. And there he was, my brother, mid-leap, every muscle working exactly as it should. A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. I kept my eyes on the judge. Out of the corner of my vision, I saw Daniel's shoulders stiffen. The audio played next. That barroom confession. His voice, clear, smug, impossible to deny. "You gotta look helpless, not be helpless." Laughter following like applause, and then the line about me. "She's too calculated." The word hung in the air like smoke. When it ended, the silence was heavy. The judge's gaze moved from the screen to Daniel, and I watched the shift, from assumed victim to possible fraud. Daniel's lawyer scrambled. He spoke about context, about performance art, about how actors rehearse physical roles even if their characters are disabled. It was almost impressive. Almost. But the evidence was clean. It didn't leave room for interpretation. Mark stood again. "Your Honor, this isn't about performance. This is about deception. Deception that altered the will of a man who believed his son could never walk again. My client has brought you proof. Not speculation. This inheritance was secured under false pretenses. It must be returned to its rightful balance." The judge didn't decide that day. That's how courts work. They make you wait. But I didn't need a verdict to know what had shifted. The room had seen the truth. The jury, if it came to that, would remember the leap, the laughter, the way the word calculated had tasted in his mouth. When we stepped outside, the reporters were already there. Cameras, questions, microphones thrust forward. I didn't answer. I just kept walking, Mark at my side. Daniel stayed inside longer than he needed to. probably because the first step out of that building would tell the world whether he still needed the chair, and when he finally emerged, he was still in it, but I saw it. The flicker of hesitation before his hands touched the wheels. It should have ended in that courtroom. It didn't. The ruling came 2 weeks later. The will was overturned. The estate was to be split evenly. My share, no longer a consolation prize, was real, tangible. On paper, it was victory, but victories on paper are cold. They don't fill the space that betrayal leaves behind. Daniel didn't call, didn't email, not a word. The silence was its own performance, a way to pretend I no longer existed. Then, on a rain-soaked Tuesday, the phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was different, softer, deliberate. "Elena, there's been an accident." The words after that blurred. Car, intersection, truck, and then the one that landed like a stone in my chest. Paralysis. By the time I reached the hospital, the air was thick with antiseptic and that quiet hum of machines that never quite goes away. I found him in a private room, pale under the fluorescent lights. Tubes, wires, a monitor tracking the slow rhythm of a body that could no longer pretend. His eyes found mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "You wrote this ending for me." The words caught me off guard. I wanted to tell him no. That fate was cruel all on its own, that I didn't push him into that street. But the truth is, in some twisted way, every move I made had brought him here. Not the accident, but the unraveling that led to it. I stood at the edge of his bed. He was smaller now somehow. The arrogance had drained out, leaving only skin, bone, and the realization that this time, there would be no curtain call. He asked me if I was happy. I didn't answer. Happiness wasn't the point. Control was. And now, I had it. In full, unchallenged. But it didn't feel like I thought it would. His gaze shifted to the window, where rain traced thin lines down the glass. I followed it, but all I saw was the reflection. Me standing there, him lying there, two people bound by blood, betrayal, and the kind of ending that doesn't let anyone walk away clean. When I finally left, I didn't say goodbye. The word felt too final. And too kind. 3 weeks passed before I went back. The hospital had moved him to a long-term care wing, the kind where time drips slowly, where the days are measured in visiting hours and medication schedules. The air smelled of bleach and resignation. I found him sitting by the window this time. The wheelchair was real now, not a prop. His hands rested in his lap, still. No restless tapping, no theatrical flourishes. Just stillness. He didn't look up when I entered. "You came back," he said flatly. "I did." I took the chair across from him, the one meant for family visits, for reconciliation, maybe even forgiveness. But that wasn't why I was here. "I wanted to see you. Like this," I admitted. His lips tightened. "Like this? Broken?" "No," I said, leaning forward. "Like yourself. Without the act, without the lies, without the power you thought you had over everyone, including me." His jaw clenched, but his eyes gave him away. There was fear there. And something else. Something that almost looked like regret. But regret is a luxury, and Daniel never paid for luxuries. "I hope you're proud of yourself," he said. "You won. You got everything you wanted." I sat back, studying him. "No, Daniel, I didn't win. This isn't winning. This is balance. You took years from me, my trust, my dignity, my place in our family. I'm just returning the weight." The rain outside tapped softly against the glass, like it was keeping score. He tried to speak, but his voice caught, not from pain, but from the realization that he had nothing left to use against me. Not his health, not his father's favor, not his lies. We sat in silence, the kind that presses in on you from all sides. When I finally stood to leave, I paused at the doorway. He was watching me, waiting, maybe for some sign of softness, a shred of mercy. I gave him neither. "Goodbye, Daniel," I said, my voice calm, measured, and then I added, "Enjoy the role. This time, it's yours forever." I walked out, leaving him in that chair, framed by the rain and the muted hum of the machines. For the first time in years, I felt the weight shift. Not gone, just no longer mine to carry. If Emily's story gripped you, imagine the other untold truths still out there. Don't miss the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with someone who loves a good twist. Your support keeps these stories alive.